Good morning. Hey, Facebook. Guess what? It is Friday. We're on day 14 of the Facebook Live challenge. And you know what happened yesterday? Unless you were on a rock, which I hope, or under a rock, I should say, not on the rock. We call the rock Key West, and the Keys are the rock. So I'm on the rock, but I'm not under a rock. So it was the day yesterday that iTunes rolled out stats. And so you might be wondering, we've been waiting for this for a while, might be wondering what in the world it means to you, what they look like. Now, they're in beta, and I'm not completely sure if everyone has access to them or not, but I wanted to show you the iTunes stats so you could kind of see them, and we can go over them really quickly and see what we've got going on. Exactly, Dave. Hooray. Just what we all wanted. The analytics we've been craving but not wanting to see for way too long. So, all right, so I'm going to share my screen with you, and we're going to go into Podcast Connect here. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this, it's just podcastconnect.apple. Oops, got to move that so I can see my screen. .apple.com. And you don't put a www in front of it, or you will get no URL pulled up. So it's just podcast.appleconnect.com. And yours won't look quite like this because you have not submitted all these shows to iTunes before all of this Podcast Connect stuff really matters. So what you want to do to see if you have your stats is go up here to My Podcasts. Now you're going to click on Podcast Analytics. Once you do that, you'll probably just see your show or any shows that you have here. I've got all these shows because I have submitted them for people eons ago, and it never mattered before Podcast Connect where they were. So I want to show you, I'm just going to go into here. Oh, let's actually look at this screen really quickly before we go anywhere. So what you're going to have is you're going to have the name of the show. You're going to have the number of devices, and this is the number of unique devices that it's on. That are actually listening to your show. Now, the one thing about it is you have to remember that somebody could potentially listen to your show on their iPhone and then go to their laptop, iTunes, or whatever, and listen to your show. And that would be two unique devices and only one listener. So a device or a unique device doesn't always mean an individual listener, but it's also the best measure of who is listening. So, I mean, unique devices tell you how many different people or different devices are accessing your show. The other things here are total time listened. And again, I just want to remind you that this is the stats for iTunes are only available for the last 60 days. So they sort of like implemented it and then updated everything after the stats had time to accumulate. They're still working through the bugs. It's still beta. So these stats are not necessarily like, certifiable. if you're an accountant, you're not necessarily going to certify these stats as the official ones. So total time listened. This tells you how many hours in the last 60 days of your podcast were listened to. And then if you got time per device. So that means on average, each one of these devices is listening this amount of time for a total number of hours listened to. So let me go down here and let's drill down into one of these, excuse me, a little more. And what I want you to see is these dashboard type stats are going to be the same ones that we just saw on the main screen, but they're going to be here. And you can actually, you could actually click on devices and you can begin to see and look at, these days and see the number of devices, individual devices you have. It's not really telling you what the devices are, but you can see that. And then you could each also go down into the individual episode, and it would pull up the devices for each individual episode. So you can also check here, devices or by episode. So you've got several ways to slice and dice these, and you can look at it however you want. But one of the interesting things that you'll look at here is your total time listened, and then they've got half the circle. They've got two different categories of the circle. They've got the subscribed. That means the number of subscribers or the percentage of subscribers that are listening to your show. And then they've got the number of the percentage of not subscribed people that are listening to your show. So for this particular show, in the last 60 days, of these particular hours, 61% of them were listened to by subscribers. 39% were not subscribers. So it does leave you a good opportunity to try to convert these 39% into subscribers, because obviously the higher the percentage of your subscribers that are listening to the show, the more downloads you're going to have and that sort of thing. So because people will begin, once they're subscribed, they're going to be getting those downloads automatically, and they'll be on their phone. So if they just go into their playlist and start hitting play, your shows are going to pop up there and they're going to be listened to. You can also see your top countries. Now, this may or may not matter to you, depending on what your content is, but it could be a little bit informative. Clearly, United States, Canada, UK, Australia, these large English-speaking countries are going to be the mainstay of most English-speaking podcasts. And depending on whether you're US-based or whether you're UK-based or whether you're based in Australia, they might just, swap positions here. But basically, it says top countries by device. So the US for this particular show had 722 unique devices, and 78% is the consumption time. So that basically means that let's just say you have an hour-long podcast, 78%, or the podcast on average is being consumed up through 78%. So whatever, 78% of 60 minutes will tell you how many minutes your people are on average listening to your show. Now that's kind of helpful, and some of these lines are going to be helpful as we go into these individual shows, because what it can tell you, let me give you an example. This right here, I was looking at this earlier. Pretty interesting. Now this is a new show. It was just released very, very short time ago, so there's not a ton of unique devices that are showing up on here. But look at what we are seeing. We are seeing between a dip between the 1 minute, essentially the 1 minute 20 second mark, and then the 2 minute 45 second mark. So my guess is that there's either some advertisements or some housekeeping or something else that's redundant that listeners are fast forwarding through. So you'll see when they fast forward through, they stop listening, and then they go on and they continue listening. And that's kind of, you'll see these across the board. You'll also see that there's a drop-off in the 10-minute mark. About the 10-minute, almost the 11-minute mark. So these kind of things for individual shows, it can be informative to let you know what your listeners are listening to and what they're not listening to. Now, let me go back and quantify all of this by saying two things. Number one, this is a very small sampling of your data, okay? It is only iTunes people that are listening. And you also have to remember that what happened within the last 60 days. In the last 60 days, iTunes released the new iOS 11 or whatever number they're on. And it has the hands-down worst podcast app ever in the history of podcast apps. So many people that used to listen via Apple Podcasts, that little purple, with the little radiant, podcast symbol on the icon, now have chosen another method to listen to their shows because they can't stand that Apple app. So that's not going to be reflected in these stats. So your stats might be much lower right now after Apple did what they did than they would have been if you had seen these at the beginning of last year. So just understand this is, again, a very small sample. It's only people that are listening on iTunes that they can track this way. So your podcast, and you can go into Libsyn if you're a Libsyn user, and maybe even other podcast hosts that will tell you what your traffic sources are if you have advanced stats. And what will happen is you can look on there and you can see what percentage of your stats are coming from iTunes, what percentage are coming from Android apps, what percentage are coming from different Chrome apps, and you can see, or different Chrome browsers and Mozilla and all these other, different places where people are listening to your show. And so realize that probably less than half of your traffic, way less than half of your traffic, is generally going to be reflected right here. And even prior to the release from iTunes, it was probably much higher than this. So take it with a grain of salt. The other part is you are more than just a download. Your worth and what you're doing is more than just a download number. So you really, you can inform a lot of what you're doing. And I was going to back up here and show you. For example, if I was looking at this show, I might look at this show right here, these two shows right here within the last 60 days. There were 89 and 85% average consumption on these shows. That means people listened almost through to the very end. Now, also, I will tell you this. This is also, when you look at the average consumption, this also tells you why many advertisers are not keen on doing post-roll advertisements because of the drop-off rate. It also tells you why, if advertisers are doing post-rolls or post-rolls? Yeah, post-rolls. It just sounded weird all of a sudden. If they're doing post-rolls, then what will happen is they're going to get a lot less money for it. So understand that this is based on what we know to be true, is that people drop off after a while. You might also look, and I'll give you some examples here, like some of these shows are very, very long. Some of these shows are very, very short. Does it make a difference in your consumption? Let's look. We've got a good sample here. We've got a 43-minute show that was 85% consumed and a 7-minute show that was 89% consumed. Well, then we have another 7-minute show that was only 79% consumed, and then another 4-minute show that was 72% consumed. So could you, say that your listeners actually prefer the shorter shows? Not in this scenario, because it's not like they are listening longer to some of these, but there are, again, you also need a bigger sampling than just the last 60 days. Because think about it, last 60 days, you might have released 6, 8, 10 shows in the last 60 days if you're the average podcaster, and it might you're just going to need a bigger sampling to make any assumptions. But begin looking at these things just for trends and just to sort of give you a little bit more information than you were getting. It's good to be able to see the unique devices accessing your show. Doesn't mean that everyone else that listens is a repeat listener or a subscriber. Again, there's some of these things are still very ambiguous right now, but the average consumption is very helpful. Seeing how many devices are accessing your show, or unique devices are accessing your show, is helpful because it might be the closest correlation to individual listeners that you have. And then at the same time, being able to see the individual dips in the show. Like you can see where people begin to fall off, and you can see some of these trend lines, and you can see that there's definite dips in places. And if you start to see these, go back and look. What are you doing there? What are you doing at that time in your show? Is it an advertisement? Many times that's what you'll see. You'll just see the dips right there. So this is going to give you a little bit of information. And again, I'm going to go back to my live video here. But again, it's not anything to live or die by. You know what I mean? If you're looking at these stats and thinking, oh my gosh, I knew my podcast sucked, look, don't make those judgments yet. It's too early. Secondly, we don't know the accuracy of these. We don't know the accuracy of these stats because even iTunes doesn't know the accuracy. So good morning, Liz. Good to see you. So just make sure that you are taking them for what they're worth and that you're looking at them objectively, and you're not basing all of your worth on what Apple says about your show. Also, again, take into consideration it's a very, very small sampling. So you're not going to be able to make all your decisions based on these kind of... Thank you, Rhoda. My most comfortable visor given to me by a friend on the Alabama-Auburn Auburn game day, I should say, and we lost anyway, even though she gave up her lucky hat, so I got to keep it. So anyway, so I just wanted to share these stats with you. And if you don't have access to them, like if you go to your Podcast Connect and you look under my podcast and the podcast analytics are not there yet, just hang tight. It'll probably get to you pretty quickly. And then at the same time, go through and look at it. But again, it's not the sum total of who you are as a podcaster. It's not the sum total of your worth. Your worth is much more than that. So please, please, please don't just go off the deep end and say, see, I knew I was doing nothing to the world. Now, I will also give you an interesting stat, and this came out in the feed, which is Libsyn's actual podcast that they do. And they were talking about the breakdown between we as podcasters, and we've had this discussion before on a Facebook Live a couple weeks ago, but as podcasters, we're highly geared toward iTunes sensitivity. And we do everything we can to jump through iTunes hoops. We jump through the review hoops. We try to get other people to do it. But the reality is that iTunes is only 50% of the podcast traffic. And the rest of them are coming from Android or other devices that are like other apps that are like Podcast Addict or Podcast Republic that are not specific to either iTunes or to Android. They can be accessed by either one. So realize that you're only looking at, like a fraction of a fraction whenever you're looking at iTunes stats. Look at them in balance. With Libsyn's going to have more robust stats. I'm not completely sure. I hope they're not done with their user interface on the new Libsyn stats, because those came out this week too. And I think there's still some more work that they're hopefully doing on those, the user experience, because I can't look at that green very much. It's kind of a bad situation. So hopefully they'll take our gentle feedback and make some, adjustments and continue tweaking that. But again, please, please, please know your worth is much more than the downloads and the stats. Go back and look at the people that have contacted you, that you touched their lives because of your podcast. Also, if you podcast I've always said this, if you podcast for no other reason than to grow and expand your network, it will be worthwhile, because you will have people now in your network that maybe you've never met them in person, but they are like your best friends online. And it's really, really an amazing thing. I'll tell you a little story. When I first started my podcast back in, I guess it was maybe 2012, I started my podcast, and it was, like I said, I think I talked about this the other day. It was a local business focused podcast. And I was doing a 5-day-a-week show, because I drank the Kool-Aid that more is better. And the more, you get your time up and you put your show out there, and if you build it, they will come. And that's not true either. So I've learned a lot over the years. But one of the things that was so interesting is that, I would reach out to people. I would make myself reach out to, because I had to do 5 interviews a week, and I was working my full-time job. So I didn't have a lot of time to put into it, but I would make myself do 10 cold contacts a day to try to find interview guests for my show. And it was before local businesses were even understanding what podcasts were. And I did all of this because I knew it was a numbers game. I knew I had to get the numbers to keep the interviews going. So when I did that, many times I would reach out to these business owners, and they would, this is so funny for those of you that know me now, I'm so telling on myself. Many of them would respond back to me, and they're like, yeah, Christy, that sounds interesting. Can you call me at this number and talk to me about it? And that was like the worst thing you could say to me, because I was so shy, and I was so insecure, and I was so not confident in what I was doing. I mean, here I am, a worker bee at a company, trying to talk to the big honcho at some other company that I don't even know about their business practices, of which I'm not an expert, so I was just, oh my gosh, it's hilarious to me when I look back now, because I would do anything possible to keep from getting on the phone with these people, because I didn't know what I was going to say to them. Even then, when I began joining the Facebook groups for podcasters, it was like nothing for people to say, oh, can someone jump on a Skype call with me? And I'm like, why would you jump on a Skype call with these people? You don't know them. Well, let me just say that we've all grown, I'm sure, and can look back and laugh at ourselves over the course of our business growth and podcasting growth. And so understand that these contacts you make and these rapport that you build with people, they are why you're podcasting, and the community that you can influence, and the conversations that you can have, because you can have conversations and you can bring in community that you would never have coming to you or being drawn to you, except that you're putting out your message through podcasting. So don't let the downloads, don't let the numbers get to you. Just keep going anyway. I know there are people that are addicted to their stats. I have those people as clients. They want to every day. Why did my stats go down? What happened? What is this peak? What is this valley? Where's this coming from? Is this a bot? I had a really good download day. Is this a bot? Is someone hacked into my podcast and they're just downloading? Is this screwing my numbers up? All of these questions. And it is addicting to get the rise of seeing your numbers grow. But just realize it's one part. It's just one part. I can't say that enough. You are not defined by your stats. And iTunes is not the boss of you. So don't let anything that you see on the screen make you feel better or worse about what you're doing. Just keep plugging along. Keep getting in touch with your people. Keep getting in front of your people. And keep drawing them together. So as you put yourself out there and as your comfort zone expands, and you know what? If you want to get on a Skype call, I'm not afraid anymore. I can do it. In fact, I'll call you on Skype. Just let me know what your ID is. And I have these conversations all the time, and I look back and I laugh and think, my goodness, Christy, what was I even doing in this world? I have no idea. In this online world, I was entering it completely introverted and shy, and I will still say I'm an introvert, but I'm expanding it. I'm getting better. I can at least fake being an extrovert long enough to do what I need to do. So anyway, look back and laugh on yourself, but look at your personal growth since you started podcasting. I was talking to a podcaster the other day, and they were like, oh my gosh, Christy, I went back and listened to my first episodes, and I was doing interviews, and I was so shy, and I was so timid, and I didn't speak my mind, and I didn't interrupt the person, and I was just and they're like, now I am so not like that. I will stop people, and I'll say, wait a minute, what do you mean by that? Because I always thought blah, 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 and they'll question and challenge people, or they'll dig deeper, and it's hilarious. They look back at their growth, and they're like, wow, I am not the same person. You know what? That's what podcasting does for you. So we're making better people as we build better communities and, hopefully changing the world. So anyway, if you have any questions about your iTunes stats, or if you are one of my clients that I might have submitted your podcast to iTunes long before Podcast Connect or long before it mattered, and we just submitted to iTunes under the Team Podcast Apple ID, there is a way we can email Apple and get them to change ownership of that so you can see your stats. So if that's your case, let me know. I'll be glad to do that for you and get some of these off of my Podcast Connect, because a lot of them are on there and I don't need them. So anyway, all right, listen, you guys, it's Friday. Hope you have a good Friday, and I hope you have plans for a wonderful weekend, and I hope you get some, if you're in the freezing cold, I hope you get some weather. If you're in the area that's threatened by the wildfires, I hope you get some rain and the winds die down. And if you are in places where it's still recovering from the hurricane, I hope you get some good weather this weekend so you can be able to get some things done. So, all right, thanks for stopping by, you guys. Have a good day. Talk to you later.